Welcome back to All Things Math, Science, Technology, and Engineering. Today we have Nikolai Begg. Welcome, Nikolai.
Thank you.
We are so excited to have him participate in the expo and be here today in the studio. Nikolai is a PhD candidate in the Department of Mechanical Engineering at MIT, and he's working in the MIT Precision Engineering Research Group. He focuses his research design on novel medical and surgical devices that improve the safety and precision of minimally invasive puncture access and tissue sampling procedures. Wow, that's a mouthful. Nikolai has developed devices in the aid of a variety of clinical fields, including aspiroscopic surgery, is that right?
Laparoscopic.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No worry.
Got that wrong. Laparoscopic surgery and endoscopic vascular access, fetal surgery, tissue biopsy, and women's health. His work in medical devices has pending patents and has been published in the Journal of the American College of Surgeons, the ASME Journal of Medical Devices, and the Medical Engineering and Physics, and he was recognized by the 2013 Lemelson MIT Student Prize for Innovation. In addition, Nikolai enjoys teaching and is currently teaching assistant for courses and part of the Gordon MIT Engineering Leadership Program. So Nikolai earned his master's degree in science and mechanical engineering from MIT in 2011, and his Bachelor of Science degree in mechanical engineering with a minor in management also from MIT in 2009.
Yep.
You've been busy.
I have, yeah.
You've been busy. Awesome.
I enjoy it.
And you're a Wellesley grad.
I am.
So let's start off from there and tell us about how your experience was growing up here in Wellesley.
Sure. Well, I was born, in Boston and grew up in Wellesley my whole life. And I was really lucky to be in the public schools the whole time, K through 12, and stayed in the public schools and really enjoyed them because there was a really strong focus on science and technology. I was able to take courses in robotics, in industrial technology. There was the wood shop, there was the auto shop, there was a robotics program, and I was really able to pursue that passion here. It wasn't just the core subjects. Also, I really enjoyed the performing arts, jazz band and concert band, but that real strong focus and ability to pursue a passion in science and engineering was pretty amazing.
So which elementary school did you go to?
I went to Bates.
Bates.
Yeah.
Nice. And do you play musical instruments as well, or?
Yeah. So I played piano starting when I was 7 or 8, and actually in high school picked up the saxophone so I could play in jazz band. You had to play in concert band as well.
Wow,
yeah.
So interesting.
Yeah.
And did you walk to school? Were you a walker?
I was a walker to elementary school.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then the bus, and then eventually started driving in high school. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Wow, awesome. So Nikolai, do you have siblings?
I do. I have a younger brother, Sebastian, 5 years younger, also grew up in the Wellesley schools.
And what does he do now?
He is about to graduate. He's a senior at MIT.
Oh,
yeah, in brain and cognitive sciences, and
so
he's actually.
You guys see each other through the day?
We do, yeah. It's a big place, but we get to hang out, which is really cool. Yeah.
They pop over for lunch and.
Yeah, exactly.
So does he come over to your lab and check things out?
Yeah. He's really interested in music, actually, in the music business, and so he has this kind of. It's pretty awesome because he has this life where he's spending a lot of time at gigs and things like that, and then he has this brain and cognitive science work he does at MIT. So we have a lot of interesting things to talk about. Yeah.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah.
So describe what it was like growing up in Wellesley when you grew up here in town.
Yeah. It wasn't too much different than it is now.
Not that it was that long ago.
No, yeah, no. There were a couple less shops, but and the old high school was still there. It was just, it was pretty great. It really offered the freedom to be able to. I felt like when there was something I was interested in, there was usually a way to go about pursuing it. So
let me ask you, what did you know what you wanted to be at an early age?
I did. Actually, I knew exactly what I wanted to be. When I was in 7th grade, there was a project called, I think it was called the iSearch, the iSearch paper, and you had to just pick a topic, and I think it was an English class, but really just interview a couple people and kind of introduction to research papers. And I picked surgical robotics, and that was at a time where these kinds of procedures were just starting to become mainstream. I interviewed a couple surgeons. I actually went and watched a surgical procedure in Boston, and interviewed a couple of the experts in the field for the paper. But it was kind of this whoa moment. Like, I had always loved building things.
Right.
I loved engineering. I loved building with Legos and kind of taking every piece of equipment apart in my home, to my parents' dismay.
Utter
but
delight, I'm
yeah,
sure.
of course. Rarely finding a way to put it back together.
Wow.
But I did this project and realized, okay, I could be doing what I loved. I could be building things, but it could be applied to this area of medicine, which was equally fascinating to me. And the idea that you could really make a difference in people's lives and help people, but doing what you really love to do.
And this was in high school when you?
No, this was in 7th grade.
7th grade.
Yeah.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, and I kind of continued that, I guess that fascination all the way through, well, until today. Kind of never really strayed from that passion.
And did your parents support you
Yeah.
to do whatever you wanted? Or?
Yeah, of course, yeah. I mean, they were really happy that I had something that I really loved to do.
And would they have predicted that you were going to go do this at an early age?
Well, they always say I was really curious when I was really young, and I was putting things together, and so I think they would have guessed, building something.
Right.
But yeah.
Neat. So, what made you decide from after high school to go to MIT? Why MIT?
MIT. Well, so after being there for a while, it's really reinforced what I thought about it and why I picked it, which was that it's a place where everybody loves to ask why, and everybody loves to delve deeper into what they're working on. But mostly everybody, there's so many different types of people over there, and everybody's interested in all sorts of different things, but everyone has this love for what they do, right? So they have their life at home, they have their social life, they have their friends. But when they go to work, they're just fascinated by what they do. So you talk to anyone who's, conducting research or working on a project, and they're just always excited to tell you what they're working on. That's really powerful. I think that, that drive and that happiness around what you do is critical.
And do you have a good community of people that you can sort of bop over to someone's office and talk to them about different stuff?
I do, yeah. I mean, just in my lab, we have this culture where, I bug my lab mates, 5 or 6 times a day, hey, can you take a look at this? Hey, what do you think about that? But it's not just, in my lab, like, I've kind of built this network across the institute, whether it's, the lab down the hall they have experts in high-speed imaging that I've used in my research. And then we have tissue labs where I've done histology studies and kind of learned rudimentary, microscopy techniques that are pretty standard for biologists, but to me in my own research has been critical. And then even extended into the network of hospitals in the area, because we have all these great teaching hospitals where the clinicians there really are equally fascinated about, by what they do and by teaching. So when you go to them and you say, hey, what you do is incredible, I want to learn more, I want to gain experience in this field, in this area, they're always happy to help. So yeah, it's a real open and inviting environment to
Awesome.
Intellectual curiosity.
Nice, and I saw photos of your lab, and it seems packed with equipment.
Yeah, we have a lot of toys.
Yeah.
So and that's the idea, is that we're building often, building, breaking, building again, and it's not just on paper, on the computer. It's very physical. Everything we do is physical.
And do you do a lot of computer modeling? Do a lot
Yeah.
of simulations?
Yeah, and that's the thing, is that it's about, for us, it's about learning when simulation is appropriate, because there's always the ability to go overboard with simulation. At the end of the day, it has to be practical, it has to be applicable. So if you're doing a simulation that gets so complicated that only understand how it works, only you can apply it, then it's not really useful to other people and to kind of get out there. So we definitely use simulation because it is an important tool. It saves a lot of time, but we're always be trying to stay practical and stay applied.
And so tell us about why the minor in management? Where did that come from?
That's a good question. Well, in undergrad, I took a management course, which was power and negotiation, and realized that there's this kind of whole other side to functioning in an organization that I didn't understand as well as I thought I should. And the minor was great because I was able to take courses with a lot of MBA students, and getting to experience that aspect and understanding how it really enhanced my work and my work in teaching. I mean, in those classes, I've been mentoring a lot of student teams, and I've benefited greatly from those management courses. But yeah, it really adds an extra dimension to working in a team and developing devices.
And do you find that the ability to communicate your designs and what you've done is also as important, perhaps, as designing?
I think it's the most important because the thing all engineers learn eventually is that it doesn't matter how great your design is if you can't communicate it and get other people to understand it and to be behind it. Mm-hmm. Even if they can't understand exactly why the light wave pattern takes a certain path that it takes, but if they can understand what the benefit is and,
right.
and how it works, and why it's important, that's how you get people to buy into something and to use it. So yeah, I mean, communication has been huge for me, and it's something I keep on learning, because I'll tell you, there's nothing like when you've developed something you're so proud of, right. and you explain it to a group of people and there's just blank stare, just blank look, and you realize, wow, okay, this is such an important part.
And I can tell that you're very passionate about teaching, so I'm sure
mm-hmm.
it comes in handy.
I do, yeah. I really enjoy teaching. I've really enjoyed being able to mentor those student teams, and I have some undergrad advisees that I've been working with, and really enjoyed that process.
And
yeah.
Are you involved in the robotics lab that they have at MIT?
So there are a number
of
labs that work on those kinds of things. I've done some work with a lab that does some interesting work in so I mentioned the high-speed video imaging. So when you build a robot, there's a lot of robots that, and also mechanical systems that benefit from, observation, especially, high-speed video. And so I've done some work with that lab, but I mean, every single day I speak to someone else, they're telling me about some crazy, fun, amazing thing they're working on. So yeah. I'm sure there's a lot of labs there I haven't even heard of.
So it must be hard not to get distracted.
It's very hard not to get distracted. That's actually been another one of kind of the biggest things I've learned to do, or to try to do at least. I keep getting distracted because there's so many fun things to work on,
a lot
right?
Of fun.
Yeah, and everybody's always saying, hey, I've got this idea, what do you think? And you think, oh man, I want to work on that too. Yeah. So, yeah, focus.
Yeah. So would you call yourself, you sound like a combination between a biochemical and mechanical engineer. So what would you call yourself?
Definitely a mechanical engineer. I'm a mechanical engineer whose work is very closely tied in with clinical work and with some bioengineering in terms of, whether it's a little bit of tissue mechanics, a little bit understanding, physiology and how the body works. But what my expertise, if you could call it that, is in precision machine design and product design.
Interesting. So how did you ever think of going into medicine?
I did.
How did you distinguish between choosing mechanical engineering versus going into medicine? That's
a great question, because when I got to college, one of the first things I did was actually joined up with a surgeon at Children's Hospital in Boston, and basically spent a summer as a medical student, essentially shadowing him and watching procedures and learning some surgical technique, observing patient rounds and talking to families, and that was a transformative experience for me, because I really was living the medical life, if you will. And yeah, I certainly had a moment that summer where it was kind of, wow, this is so cool. Is this what I want to do? And what I realized eventually was that what I loved about surgery was that working with your hands and that tinkering. And in effect, you're in a crude comparison, you're fixing the body as a mechanic, fixes a car, essentially. And that was what I loved about it, was that working with your hands, not so much everything else that came with it. So, that was for me a really powerful experience to realize, no, what I really love to do is to observe this and maybe participate in it, but really develop the devices to make it better.
Nice. So tell us about the device. And you won the Lemelson for
I
this
did,
device.
yeah. That was an incredible opportunity. So a lot of my work has been in tissue puncture, and going back to that first summer at the hospital. My first experience in the operating room was watching a laparoscopic surgery, which is a surgery where instead of a traditional open incision, the surgeon is going to go through these very small incisions in the abdomen and insert a camera and some really thin instruments, right? So to create these really small incisions, the way it's done is you take a sharp pointed instrument, it's kind of a glorified spear, and push it through until it pops through the abdomen, right? And you can imagine one of the risks is it goes too far.
Right.
And it's actually a significant risk in these types of surgeries, and that kind of stuck out to me as, you know, we're doing this state-of-the-art gold standard surgery, but there's this kind of fundamental beginning step that's so risky.
We're still Vikings in the beginning.
Yeah, exactly. You know, it's this to stab the patient, you know. But, and so, you know, I thought a lot about that problem and ended up working on this device. And the idea behind the device is that, so, you know, from high school physics, right, the, you know, F equals mass, you know, force times equals mass times acceleration. So when you're pressing a device against tissue and it pops out the other side, okay, if you're applying more force, if you have to apply more force to get it through the tissue, well, when it pops out, you're going to have more acceleration. So if you can use a really sharp tip, a really sharp bladed device, you're going to need less force to push it through, and the idea is there's less acceleration. But when you have a sharp tip on your device, there's always a way to hurt someone with it, right? So the idea behind this device is that as soon as the tip of the device punctures through tissue, it's retracted backwards. So it actually, a spring is opposing that forward acceleration. So as soon as it pops through, it becomes safe.
So interesting. And so is there, depending on the body area, is there different thicknesses? That you'd have to calibrate your device for?
Right. So the nice thing about the device, it's it's actually purely mechanical, so there's no sensors or electronics. But it's a mechanism that can be tuned for different tissue types, for different applications. And you're right, you know, even different patients. That's the thing that adds so much complexity to these types of procedures, is that even different patients are built differently, and tissue mechanics changes based on temperature, how much water you drank that day, fat content, everything. So there's, you know, different patient types and different tissue types. You have to tune the device slightly differently.
And that would be the medical end of it, where they would have to assess the thickness that they would have to calibrate for.
Well, the nice thing is that for a certain application, you only have to tune for a minimum force, right? So you don't have to kind of narrow to an exact value, right? So as long as the mechanism deploys at a minimum level and you're not below that. So if you had a safety factor, you could, for a certain application, kind of tune that device for a certain type of procedure.
Wow, that is interesting. And did you have to, so it's spring-loaded, is that correct? And did you have to design that spring from scratch?
So I use a stock spring. What I designed really was the mechanism and the flexural mechanism. So you can imagine, you know, like I don't know if you've ever seen one of those toys where it's like a, you know, basically a scissor linkage, right? Like a zigzag linkage that kind of extends outwards. So you can imagine there's all these pins, right? So you have two popsicle sticks and you stick a paper clip through. That's a pin jointed linkage. And so this device has a couple links in it. It's a, you know, linked mechanism. And if you can take a mechanism like that, and if the motion of the links is small enough, you can just take the pin out and make it flexural, make it bend like a, you know, like a spring. And so this is that device. It's actually entirely flexural. There's no moving parts, I guess you'd put it. It's just the whole thing bends to be able to function correctly. So there was a lot of work in designing that flexural mechanism.
And how long did it take you to put this together?
So yeah, so I've been working, well, I started working on the project 2.5 years ago. And I had a working prototype pretty quickly within about 4 or 5 months, but there's been a lot of kind of redesign and redevelopment since then.
Wow, so a while, and then before that was the thought process. So
yeah, exactly.
So
it's been an ongoing,
it's a good 5-6 year project basically.
Yeah.
Right? Wow, interesting. And do you have your patents pending?
Yep. Yeah.
When will we see this on the market?
It's a good question. So you talked about communication. That's been kind of the next big thing, is learning, okay, the device is patented, what's the next step, right? and really understanding why is a device, marketable or not marketable. A lot of these different procedures, the devices they use are commoditized, right? So there's already manufacturing lines set up, and they're spitting these things out at, a couple hundred an hour, right? How do you convince a device maker that has their line already up? Well, I want you to take that away, replace it with an entirely new manufacturing line so you can save one extra patient out of 1,000, right?
You got to go to the Shark Tank.
Yeah, right?
Yeah. That's where we'd have you on next.
Exactly.
We'll put you on the Shark Tank. We'll send this video out to them.
All right.
Sounds good. So what is your thought process on that, on getting it out there, aside from the Shark Tank?
Yeah, aside from, that's a big part of it.
Yeah.
Well, I think, right now it's about approaching basically the companies that are working in certain clinical areas where I feel like the need is greatest. Right. Also a lot of areas where there's kind of a lack of devices. So I mentioned laparoscopic trocars in the beginning. Well, that's an area where, people have been working on this problem for a very, very long time. And there's a lot of devices out there. And do I think they fully solve the problem? No, I don't think so. But so many people have tried so many different versions that they're a little tired of, spending money on the problem.
Sure.
But a place like epidurals, where 1 out of 100 epidurals, up to 1 out of 100, results in a complication where the needle goes too far and actually punctures into the structures of the spine, and you can end up with anything from headaches to minor paralysis. So it's
pinched nerves.
Pinched nerves, exactly. So it's much more of a risk. It's the application might be a little more salient in those procedures. And the nice thing is that the list of procedures where this is applicable keeps growing.
It seems limitless.
Right. I mean, think of the last time you went to the doctor and you didn't get stuck with something.
Exactly.
Right?
I can't think of the last
Puncture
time I did that.
is really everywhere. Yeah.
Awesome. So did you have lots of friends who were not interested in STEM fields while you were growing up?
Yeah. I mean, everybody has their own passion.
Right.
And I think that, part of my experience too was not, you have that thing you love to do, and that's really important. But the other important thing is to appreciate those other things. And even if, you're not developing an expertise in them, develop an understanding. For example, I always say I struggled with English class, right? And when I remember being a freshman in high school, and I couldn't stand writing essays. It was just essay after essay after essay. And I don't know when it was that I kind of just realized that this is probably something I might be doing later. Even if I was, an engineer and working on devices, I might have to write something. And so really tried to take advantage. I mean, we had an incredible English curriculum and essay writing curriculum. And I think I really benefited from that. And I remember getting to college and feeling like I was really well prepared in that area. Now, in research, I write papers all the time.
Right.
Grants, papers, my thesis, everything. And being able to communicate through writing, being able to understand not just, how to read something and understand it, but how to have an idea and put it and structure it in a long or short paper and communicate it well. It's one of the most important skills I exercise on a daily basis. And, remembering it wasn't so much about, in high school reading Mrs. Dalloway and being able to write a paper on chapter 15. It was about, okay, what's my idea and how do I communicate it well, and really understanding that. And so I had a lot of friends who, their passion was history, or their passion was music, or even English. And, some of them didn't quite particularly say, I want to be a scientist when I grew up, but they knew that it was important. It was important to understand because, hey, math, right? Whether you're using it to do your taxes or to, plan out square footage in your home or anything, it's something that, or even, a complex scientific application, it's something that math is everywhere, writing is everywhere, science and understanding of science is everywhere. I mean, engineering, the really basic applications of engineering it's home repair, or or when I say basic, I mean universal. Everybody needs to do a little bit of engineering at some point. So
awesome! That's an excellent way to put it. I'm so glad you said that.
Thanks.
I read this article about how the humanities and liberal arts is going digital.
Mm-hmm.
So now instead of writing that essay, you can make a video.
Yeah.
And there are actual colleges that are granting degrees in digital humanities.
Mm-hmm.
So I read about this one student who used GPS to map the trajectories of all of Virginia Woolf's main characters in her novels.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah. No. I've had to do a lot of video, and again, it's another communication medium, and you can talk about, say video is kind of the, there's presentations, right?
Mm-hmm.
Presentations almost the bridge between, video and writing, or even kind of something entirely different. And making presentations, even, that's something that I've had to learn how to do, and how does that apply?
Right.
Because when you go in front of an audience of scientific peers, and you've been working on something yourself for,
Right.
2 years, but now you have to go in front of people who can understand it but don't necessarily believe you until you
Right.
can prove yourself. It helps to know how
Right.
to present yourself in the visual medium as well.
So it's like a verbal essay.
Yeah, exactly.
So, and you have to know how to structure that
Yep.
in order to present
Mhm.
your findings.
Yeah.
Awesome. So what do you feel about the expo? Are you excited that we're finally having an expo in Wellesley?
I'm very excited for it. I think, again, one of the things I love most is, I guess, recognizing excitement and fascination in other people. I remember being so excited about all this stuff when I was at the public schools, and I hope that some people will and some people will come who are already fascinated by science and engineering and math, and some people who aren't necessarily fascinated but want to learn more and really get to see what can you do with this, and what how is it applicable.
Excellent. And so I have an off-topic question for you.
Okay.
So I noticed on the photographs that your device is yellow. So why
Yeah.
yellow?
That's a good question.
It does
Why
make
yellow?
it pop, but
It makes it pop.
I was
It's a
just
high.
wondering if that's your favorite color.
So no, not at all. My favorite color is blue. It's a high contrast color that, so I, in those prototypes, to be able to rapidly iterate through different designs, I use a laser cutter.
Mm-hmm.
And it's this great tool where I can design the device, geometry on the computer, and then basically I put a piece of plastic in the laser cutter and I hit go, and the laser basically cuts the shape out of plastic.
Mm-hmm.
Saves a ton of machining time
Sure.
and a ton of cost. And if I wanted something that I could photograph and that would show
Right.
up well against that black
Right.
background I
Exactly,
picked.
especially when you hold it
Right.
up like this.
Exactly.
The yellow looks really
Right.
good.
And when you use white, sometimes the edges get a little burnt,
That's true.
so it looks a little grimy. So yellow is the one. Yeah.
Excellent. So it was design, mechanical
Yes,
engineering,
yes.
and design and graphics.
Exactly.
Awesome. Excellent. Well, so we're about the expo. We now have over 75 hands-on exhibits. So before or after your talk,
Sure.
you can learn how to build a glacier,
All right.
or
Yeah.
put together a satellite, or get your soil analyzed.
All right.
Get your parents to come with a soil sample from their yard.
Okay.
And we have someone analyzing soil. So
Man,
it's gonna be fun.
that's gonna be cool.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Nikolai.
Thank you.
This has been such a pleasure to talk to you today.
Appreciate it.
And stay tuned for Nikolai's TED Talk. That's coming up after this episode.
The first time I stood in the operating room and watched a real surgery, I had no idea what to expect. I was a college student in engineering. I thought it was going to be like on TV. Ominous music playing in the background, beads of sweat pouring down the surgeon's face. But it wasn't like that at all. There was music playing on this day. I think it was Madonna's Greatest Hits. And there was plenty of conversation, not just about the patient's heart rate, but about sports and weekend plans. And since then, the more surgeries I watched, the more I realized this is how it is. In some weird way, it's just another day at the office. But every so often, the music gets turned down, everyone stops talking, and stares at exactly the same thing. And that's when you know that something absolutely critical and dangerous is happening. The first time I saw that, I was watching a type of surgery called laparoscopic surgery. And for those of you who are unfamiliar, laparoscopic surgery, instead of the large open incision you might be used to with surgery, a laparoscopic surgery is where the surgeon creates these 3 or more small incisions in the patient and then inserts these long, thin instruments and a camera and actually does the procedure inside the patient. Now this is great because there's much less risk of infection, much less pain, shorter recovery time, but there is a trade-off. Because these incisions are created with a long, pointed device called a trocar. And the way the surgeon uses this device is that he takes it and he presses it into the abdomen until it punctures through. And now the reason why everyone in the operating room was staring at that device on that day was because he had to be absolutely careful not to plunge it through and puncture it into the organs and blood vessels below. But this problem should seem pretty familiar to all of you because I'm pretty sure you've seen it somewhere else. Remember this? You knew that at any second that straw was going to plunge through, and you didn't know if it was going to go out the other side and straight into your hand or if you were going to get juice everywhere, but you were terrified, right? Every single time you did this, you experienced the same fundamental physics that I was watching in the operating room that day. And it turns out it really is a problem. In 2003, the FDA actually came out and said that trocar incisions might be the most dangerous step in minimally invasive surgery. Again, in 2009, we see a paper that says that trocars account for over half of all major complications in laparoscopic surgery. And oh, by the way, this hasn't changed for 25 years. So when I got to graduate school, this is what I wanted to work on. And I was trying to explain to a friend of mine what exactly I was spending my time doing. And I said, it's like when you're drilling through a wall to hang something in your apartment, right? There's that moment when the drill first punctures through the wall, and there's this plunge, right? And he looked at me and he said, "You mean like when they drill into people's brains?" And I said, "Excuse me?" And then I looked it up, and they do drill into people's brains. A lot of neurosurgical procedures actually start with a drill incision through the skull. And if the surgeon isn't careful, he can plunge directly into the brain. Now, so this was the moment when I started thinking, okay, cranial drilling, laparoscopic surgery, why not other areas of medicine? Because think about it, when was the last time you went to the doctor and you didn't get stuck with something, right? So the truth is, in medicine, puncture is everywhere. And here are just a couple of the procedures that I've found that involve some tissue puncture step. And if we take just 3 of them, laparoscopic surgery, epidurals, and cranial drilling, these procedures account for over 30,000 complications every year in this country alone. I call that a problem worth solving. So let's take a look at some of the devices that are used in these types of procedures. So I mentioned epidurals. This is an epidural needle. It's used to puncture through the ligaments in the spine and deliver anesthesia during childbirth. Here's a set of bone marrow biopsy tools. These are actually used to burrow into the bone and collect bone marrow or sample bony lesions. And I already showed you the laparoscopic surgery trocar, but here it is again. Here's a bayonet from the Civil War. If I had told you it was a medical puncture device, you probably would have believed me, right? Because what's the difference? So the more I did this research, the more I thought there has to be a better way to do this. And for me, the key to this problem is that all these different puncture devices share a common set of fundamental physics. So what are those physics? Let's go back to drilling through a wall. So you're applying a force on the drill towards the wall, right? And Newton says the wall is going to apply a force back, equal and opposite. So as you drill through the wall, those forces balance. But then there's that moment when the drill first punctures through the other side of the wall. And right at that moment, the wall can't push back anymore. But your brain hasn't reacted to that change in force. So for that millisecond, or however long it takes you to react, you're still pushing. And that unbalanced force causes an acceleration. And that is the plunge. But what if right at the moment of puncture, you could pull that tip back, actually oppose the forward acceleration? That's what I set out to do. So imagine you have a device and it's got some kind of sharp tip to cut through tissue. Now what's the simplest way you could pull that tip back? I chose a spring. So when you extend that spring, you extend that tip out so it's ready to puncture tissue. The spring wants to pull the tip back. So how do you keep the tip in place until the moment of puncture? I use this mechanism. When the tip of the device is pressed against tissue, the mechanism expands outwards and wedges in place against the wall. And the friction that's generated locks it in place and prevents the spring from retracting the tip. But right at the moment of puncture, the tissue can't push back on the tip anymore. So the mechanism unlocks and the spring retracts the tip. Let me show you that happening in slow motion. This is about 2,000 frames a second, and I'd like you to notice the tip that's right there on the bottom about to puncture through tissue. And you'll see that right at the moment of puncture, right there, the mechanism unlocks and retracts that tip back. I want to show it to you again a little closer up. So you're going to see this sharp bladed tip, and right when it punctures that rubber membrane, it's going to disappear into this white blunt sheath. Right there. That happens within 4/100ths of a second after puncture. And because this device is designed to address the physics of puncture and not the specifics of cranial drilling or laparoscopic surgery or another procedure, it's applicable across these different medical disciplines and across different length scales. But it didn't always look like this. This was my first prototype. Yes, those are popsicle sticks, and there's a rubber band at the top. It took about 30 minutes to do this, but it worked. And it proved to me that my idea worked. It justified the next couple of years of work on this project. I worked on this because this problem really fascinated me. I mean, it kept me up at night. But I think it should fascinate you too, because I said puncture is everywhere. That means at some point, it's going to be your problem too. That first day in the operating room, I never expected to find myself on the other end of a trocar. But last year, I got appendicitis when I was visiting Greece. So I was in the hospital in Athens, and the surgeon was telling me he was going to perform a laparoscopic surgery. He was going to remove my appendix through these tiny incisions, and he was talking about what I could expect for the recovery and what was going to happen. He said, "Do you have any questions?" And I said, "Just one, doc. What kind of trocar do you use?" So my favorite quote about laparoscopic surgery comes from a Dr. H.C. Jacobius. And he said, "It is puncture itself that causes risk." Now, that's my favorite quote because H.C. Jacobius was the first person to ever perform laparoscopic surgery on humans, and he wrote that in 1912. So this is a problem that's been injuring and even killing people for over 100 years. So it's easy to think that for every major problem out there, there's some team of experts working around the clock to solve it. The truth is, that's not always the case. We have to be better at finding those problems and finding ways to solve them. So if you come across a problem that grabs you, let it keep you up at night. Allow yourself to be fascinated, because there are so many lives to save.